One of the features this week, as the pound plunged in value against the US dollar, as the interest rate the government had to pay on its debt went up, and as the Bank of England had to intervene to help pension funds deal with turmoil on the financial markets after Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget on Friday, has been no Liz Truss. She hasn't done interviews, she hasn't been on any visits, she hasn't done speeches or press conferences or tweeted about what was happening. That all changed this morning, though, because she did a series of interviews with BBC Local Radio, which is a kind of prime ministerial tradition before the Conservative Party conference, which is starting in Birmingham this weekend. So we're now going to bring you the interviews that she did with BBC Local Radio in Leeds, Norfolk, Kent, Lancashire, Nottingham, Tees, Bristol and Stoke.
Newscast from the BBC.
We will deliver, we will deliver, we will deliver.
Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah.
Joining me now is the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
How are you? How are you doing? Have you slept well?
I have, thank you very much.
Good.
And it's great to be here on Radio Leeds.
I am really glad that you are here as well, because since Friday, since your Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget, the pound has dropped to a record low. The IMF has said that you should reevaluate your policies, and the Bank of England has had to spend £65 billion to prop up the markets because of what they describe as a material risk. Where have you been?
Well, I think we've got to remember the situation we were facing this winter. We were facing a situation where people could have had to pay energy bills of up to £6,000, where inflation was increasing and where we were looking at an economic slowdown which would have had a huge impact right across the country, including in places like Leeds. So we had to take decisive action. And that's why we took action to make sure people aren't paying a typical fuel bill of more than £2,500.
Yeah.
That's going to come in this Saturday.
That was before the mini-budget, though, Prime Minister. I'm talking about the last 4 days. Where have you been? Because we've not heard from you in the last 4 days.
Well, I'm here today on Radio Leeds talking to you.
Brilliant. I'm so glad that
you
are.
The point I'm making is that we had to take decisive action to help people through this winter and next winter. I understand that families are struggling with their fuel bills, and we had to take urgent action to get our economy growing, get Britain moving, and also deal with inflation. And of course, that means taking controversial and difficult decisions. But I'm prepared to do that as Prime Minister, because what's important to me is that we get our economy moving, we make sure that people are able to get through this winter, and we are prepared to do what it takes to make that happen.
Speaking of getting the economy moving, speaking of growth, how do you think your, controversial risk has gone?
Well, what it has done is it has made sure that people and businesses will be paying lower taxes. It's opened up new road projects, new infrastructure projects, which will mean that we can get on with doing the things that will help people, whether it's getting to work, setting up their own business and growing the economy. And what it's done is made sure that businesses and people are protected from these very high fuel bills this winter. And let's remember why we're here. We're here because of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. That's pushed up global energy prices. Countries are under pressure around the world. Currencies are under pressure around the world. And that's why it's so important that this government took urgent action. And within a week of becoming Prime Minister, I took urgent action on the energy bills. We've taken urgent action through our fiscal statement, and we will continue to make sure that we are on the side of people who work hard, who do the right thing, and making sure that people aren't facing those very, very high energy costs.
Well, speaking of, what has actually happened, did you know that there was a risk of this happening, the pound dropping to a record low? Because at the moment, we're not seeing growth in the UK. We're seeing the pound dropping. We're seeing the IMF getting involved. We're seeing the Bank of England having to intervene.
So we're working very, very closely with the Bank of England, and it's important that we have an independent Bank of England. They're responsible for setting interest rates. And of course, the Chancellor and the Bank of England work closely together. We're facing very, very difficult economic times. We're facing that on a global level. I talk to a lot of my overseas counterparts about issues like energy, about making sure that we're dealing with those global economy. But the important thing is that the British government acted to make sure that people are protected from these high energy costs, to make sure we're getting the economy going. And of course, a lot of the measures that we've announced won't happen overnight. We won't see the growth come through overnight. But what's important is that we're putting this country on a better trajectory for the long term. But
how long will that take? Because at the moment there are people who can't wait. They can't wait for things to get better, to get worse before they get better.
Well, the fuel action, the action we've taken on fuel bills will start this weekend. And we acted quickly.
But that's in terms of what's going on with inflation, with what's going on with the economy at the moment. Is that not just a drop in the water?
The national insurance reductions will happen this autumn. That's why we had to take urgent action to make sure people aren't facing those higher national insurance bills. And the projects that we want to get on with, like the road projects, the broadband projects, the mobile projects, those will be happening over the next year. So we're getting things done as quickly as we can to get our economy moving, but also, most importantly, making sure we're supporting families and businesses through what is a very tough winter.
So I just want to tell you, because a lot of people have been getting in touch with us, Liz, about what they would ask you if they were here. There's lots of people in West Yorkshire who were struggling. Have a listen to Lee. We met him at a food bank here in West Yorkshire. This is what he had to say.
If it weren't for the food bank, I wouldn't be able to feed my children and myself. I'm just at the amount where I can't claim any help whatsoever. And then you get the small pay rises and then everything just goes up. Not only am I working harder than ever at work, prices of everything going up, as electric and gas bills are going to go through the roof soon. I have a wife who suffers with mental illness as it is, and it's quite hard. You try to cope on the outside, but I'm not really well, to be honest with you.
That's quite heartbreaking to listen to, Prime Minister. What would you say to people like Lee? And there are lots of them listening in West Yorkshire right now.
Well, the issues that Lee raises, and is clearly very, very difficult for people. It's very difficult for Lee. But the issue he raises, like inflation, the package that we put forward on energy is going to reduce, or likely to reduce, inflation by up to 5%. The action we've taken on energy bills will mean that Lee and other people living in West Yorkshire aren't going to be facing energy bills of £6,000, which is what was forecast. They're going to be those through the energy price guarantee. The maximum will be £2,500. And the action we're taking on the economy to get the economy growing is all about making sure that people have higher wages in the future, that we are getting the investment into places like West Yorkshire, that we are building those new roads, that we are helping businesses get on so that we can have that higher wage economy. So this is exactly the reason we're doing what we're doing, is to help people like Lee through this winter,
Prime
but
Minister.
also make sure that he has a secure future in the long term.
Thank you for being here. I don't know whether that answer will help Lee in the short term. I don't know whether that will give Lee any hope for the long term, but thank you for being here nonetheless. Prime Minister Liz Truss there, here with us on BBC Radio Leeds with me, Rima. I will have to let you go, Prime Minister. Lots of other local radio stations waiting to have their turn to ask some questions.
Live on BBC Radio Norfolk, the South West Norfolk MP, and Prime Minister Liz Truss. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Let me start by asking you about the financial turmoil we've seen since Friday. Are you still confident in your policy?
Well, I think we have to look at the situation we would be facing if the government hadn't acted. People were looking at fuel bills of up to £6,000. Very, very high inflation and slowing economic growth. And that is why we had to act as a government. First of all, by making sure, and this will start on Saturday, that nobody is having to pay a typical fuel bill of more than £2,500. Also, but in doing that, we are making sure that we're curbing inflation by up to 5%, which will cut the amount people are having to pay. But also taking the action we needed to take to reduce the tax burden and get the economy going so that we can avoid the economic slowdown that was projected. And it's really important we took that action quickly. Of course, there are elements of controversy, as there always are, but my priority was making sure that we were supporting the British people in what is going to be a very difficult winter,
but it's not
a difficult time.
It's not just controversy, though, is it? Because since Friday, the IMF, the Bank of England, the Bishop of Norwich, the RSPB, wildlife trusts across the country have all spoken out against various parts of the mini-budget. Can you reassure our listeners that your judgment is better than those well-respected organisations and individuals I've just mentioned?
As Prime Minister, I have to do what I believe is right for the country and what is going to help move our country forward. And of course, there are many people with many different opinions, but what I think nobody is arguing with is that we had to take action to deal with what is a very, very difficult economic situation. And this situation has been caused by Putin's appalling war in Ukraine that has pushed up energy prices. We're still facing the aftermath of the COVID crisis. And it's important the United Kingdom's on the front foot, that we are pulling all the levers we can to drive economic growth, which ultimately is about making sure that people have jobs and they have higher wage jobs in the future, getting the infrastructure investment. And I know as a Norfolk MP, getting roads upgraded like the A47, getting our mobile and broadband in is important. And we are pushing ahead with that. That is what we are pushing ahead with to make sure we get the economy growing, but also we help people in the short term with their energy bills and by keeping taxes low. So people will see a reduction in their national insurance. Companies will not be facing increased tax bills, and that will keep our economy going at what is a very difficult time for the world. And it's not just Britain that's facing difficulties. This is a global problem.
You're about to take on your first Conservative conference as leader. You're being urged to recall Parliament. You're being urged to row back on some of the tax cuts that were promised in the budget. Does a strong leader stick to Plan A regardless, or do they admit when things haven't gone to plan and change course?
This is the right plan that we've set out. This is about making sure that people are going into the winter not worried about ultra-high fuel bills, which is what we were looking at. It was simply unconscionable that we could have allowed that to happen and we could allow people to be facing that fear of not being able to pay their fuel bill. And it's also important that we're taking steps to improve growth levels in our economy, because if we don't, we're not going to get the high wage jobs, we're not going to get the opportunities, we're not going to get the investment that we need to see in our county and across our country. And of course, there will always be people who oppose a particular measure. There will always be people, and it's not necessarily easy, but we have to do it.
Speaking of investment in our county, you are the South West Norfolk MP, and in the constituency next to yours, there'll be lots of people who'll be going to work for the NHS in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital today, and they're working in an environment where the roof is held up by, at the last count, 1,500 props. Can you guarantee that Kings Lynn will get a new hospital?
Well, as you know, as a local MP, I've been lobbying very hard to see improvements at the Queen Elizabeth, and I've seen for myself the very difficult situation with the roof. And of course, we have a new Health Secretary, Therese Coffey. I do hope she'll visit the Queen Elizabeth Hospital soon to see the situation there and make sure that action is taken.
She'll be the fourth Health Secretary to have visited.
For the patients.
So when is it going to happen?
She will be the one that delivers.
You hope? Norfolk needs this.
I'm not making promises on her behalf, but I will certainly be putting that case as the local MP.
Liz Truss, welcome to the Wake Up Call. Thank you for your time. Time is short, so I'm going to just blaze on into the questions. Lots from my listeners this morning. Carrie in Birchington says, what on earth were you thinking? The country was already in a state of recession. Another says, how can we ever trust the Conservatives with our economy again? And Lydia says, are you ashamed of what you've done? Are you?
I think we have to remember what situation this country was facing. We were going into the winter with people expected to face fuel bills of up to £6,000, huge rates of inflation.
And you've made it
but
worse.
Also slowing economic growth. And what we've done is we've taken action to make sure that from this weekend, people won't be paying a typical fuel bill of more than £2,500, not just this year, but also next year.
But isn't that cancelled out by the fact
inflation.
that you're making inflation work with the measures that you have brought in on Friday in the mini budget? People are worried about their mortgages and they're tearing their hair out over their pensions. I've got so many messages, Liz.
This will curb inflation by up to 5%.
When?
What we're also doing is taking action this winter. So the action we've taken on energy is expected to curb inflation by up to 5%. And we're also taking action to grow the economy because we were facing an economic slowdown. We have to remember why that is. It's because of Putin's appalling war in Ukraine has pushed up global energy prices.
These problems are bad, but I'm going to jump in because time is short. We've seen the Bank of England having to intercede because of the measures that your government brought in on Friday. This doesn't normally happen.
We're working very, very closely with the Bank of England. The Bank of England run
They're putting out your fire, to be fair.
Monetary policy. The Bank of England run an independent monetary policy. They set interest rates. We have seen difficult markets around the world because of the very difficult international situation we face. And what our government has done is we've taken decisive action. First of all, on energy bills, which is the biggest part of the package that we put forward, and I think that was the right thing to do.
It's the other decisive action that people are worried about.
I think it would have been unconscionable for us to allow people to go into this winter and next winter facing those high energy bills. We've also taken action to reduce our tax burden, which was at a 70-year high.
And when the Chancellor talks about more tax cuts, that has massively affected the markets. Let's not shy away from that. We saw the pound absolutely dive, and we've all got used to talking about bonds and gilts. I've learned what they are recently. This cannot happen. We cannot have our entire monetary security undermined like this.
Well, as I say, we're working very closely with the Bank of England. We face a difficult international situation, and I am very clear the government has done the right thing by taking action urgently to deal with inflation, to deal with the economic slowdown, and to deal with the high energy bills. And of course, that involves taking difficult decisions. And as Prime Minister, I'm prepared to take difficult decisions and do the right thing.
Another question from a listener then. What level of suffering is acceptable to ordinary households in order to achieve your perceived goal of growth sometime in the future?
Well, what I've been doing is taking action to help ordinary households who would have been facing fuel bills of up to £6,000.
Haven't you been reading the news with respect?
Taken action. We've taken action by the government stepping in, making sure that nobody is paying fuel bills.
Ms. Truss, this is a crisis.
More than £2,500.
This is a crisis, and many people are saying you've made it worse by your actions. Are you going to reverse what was announced in the mini budget in order to at least make things better now for my listeners who are not sleeping at night?
I don't accept the premise of the question. The action we've taken has been helping people with their fuel bills. That will start off this weekend. It's been helping people with their tax bills. People are going to pay less national insurance. But we are facing difficult economic times. I don't deny this. This is a global problem. But what is absolutely right is the UK government has stepped in and acted at this difficult time.
I have 30 seconds left with you, Ms. Truss, so I'm going to ask you a very quick one on small boats coming over. What is your plan? People of Kent want to know, are you sticking with the Rwanda policy or is there something else?
We are, and what we will make sure is that UK courts can't be overruled by the European Court of Human Rights. So we are able to deal with the small boats crisis, and the Home Secretary is determined to get on with that. OK,
no time for any more questions. We leave you with a very big thank you then. The Prime Minister of the country, busy lady, spending time with us here at the Wake Up Call. We needed to let her go because she is doing a round of media interviews this morning, so she needs to get to the next one. So we need to stick to the agreed time frame. That time went very quickly, didn't it?
Thank you for all your questions, by the way, to the Prime Minister. Loads of questions from Sue, from Catherine and Gary, from Graham in Lancaster, from Nikki, from Andy in St Anne's, from Adam in Blackburn, Biker Nigel, thanks to yours, and Sean from Chorley. Let's speak live to the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Prime Minister, good morning.
Good morning.
Lots to talk about, and I want to keep it local. And I want to talk about fracking. Let's talk about fracking. We're the only area of the country that's actually done it. And it caused earthquakes. People's houses shook. Why do you think it's safe to continue? Because none of the science has changed.
Well, what I want to be clear about is that we will only press ahead with fracking in areas where there is local community support for that. And the Business Secretary has been very clear about that. Now, fracking is carried out perfectly safely in various parts of the world, and the Business Secretary will make sure that any fracking that takes place is safe. But it's very important for me as Prime Minister that any fracking has local community consent. But I think we have to be clear about why we're doing this. One thing that has happened is that the UK has become dependent on global energy prices. And we've seen through Vladimir Putin's appalling war in Ukraine how energy prices have shot up, and Russia has used the fact that it produces gas as a way of exerting pressure on other countries. And we simply don't want to be in that position. So what I want to see is more homegrown energy in the UK.
Okay.
And that means using resources in the North Sea. It means more renewables. It means more nuclear. And it also means fracking in areas where there is local support.
You mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg. In the House of Commons, he called people who didn't support fracking Luddites and said there was an air of hysteria about them. Do you agree with his comments?
I wouldn't have expressed it like that, I can assure you. I am of the view that we need to have local consent to proceed with projects like fracking. I also support that for housing. What I want is, and this is why we're setting up new investment zones across the country with local support to get the economy going, to get investment into our country. And the same is true for energy projects as well.
Let's talk about local consent right now. What does that look like? Scott Benton, the Conservative MP for Blackpool South, in a tweet says he believes that people in Blackpool South do not support fracking. This is the Tory MP for Fylde, Mark Menzies, in the House of Commons.
If the Prime Minister is to remain a woman of her word, a woman that we can believe in, which I believe she is, can the Secretary of State outline how that local consent will be given and demonstrated in my constituency of Fylde?
What does local consent look like, Prime Minister?
Well, the Energy Secretary will be laying out in more detail exactly what that looks like, but it does mean making sure there is local support for going ahead. And I can assure
it sounds like you don't know.
And I can assure Mark Menzies, well, there are various detailed issues to be worked through, but I can assure Mark Menzies that I will make sure there is local consent if we are to go ahead in any particular area with fracking.
But your local MPs don't want it, all Conservative. In the past, the County Council have said they didn't want it, yet your government overturned it. The science hasn't changed. Why can't you tell us this morning there won't be a return to fracking in Lancashire?
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question.
Why?
It's certainly the case at present. Because what I've said is if there is local consent, we will go ahead. We need to explore where there is local consent and where there isn't, and we're still doing that work.
Your
I don't
Chancellor,
think we should rule out the whole of Lancashire.
You talked about how it's a success in other countries, but in America they do it in the middle of nowhere. Do you actually know where Preston New Road is, where they have been fracking?
Well, I don't think I've been to that site in the past.
Shouldn't you?
Well, as I've said, we will only go ahead with projects where there is local consent. I'm very, very clear about that. Now, we will make sure that that local consent is in place. And if there is a concern about a particular site, those concerns will, of course, be looked at and taken into account.
Let's talk about people's pockets. What do you think the people who voted Tory for the first time and elected a Tory MP in places like Burnley, in Hyndburn and Blackpool South, will they still be thinking that you're on their side? You've given a huge tax cut to the highest earners. They'll get on average, about 10 grand a year back. Will your Red Wall supporters think that that's fair? Is it fair, Prime Minister?
Well, what is fair is that people were facing huge energy bills this winter of up to £6,000. And because the government has stepped in, we are making sure that nobody faces energy bills of more than a typical £2,500 from this weekend.
And you've dealt with that, but also people's mortgages now. And you've dealt with that now, but people's mortgages now, because of what you did on...
That's a big thing we dealt with. It's a big thing.
Yeah, but people now are worried they can't...
And can I just say, it is the biggest thing, Graham, in the budget we just announced was the energy support. That was the biggest thing, and I think people should understand that. But
another big thing is people are worried, very worried, who are paid quite well, that they won't be able to do their mortgage payments next year because the interest rates are sky high after your not-so-many budget on Friday.
Interest rates are a matter for the Independent Bank of England. That's a very important principle. And we've seen interest rates go up around the world. We are facing a global economic situation. My priority as Prime Minister is making sure that the British public are protected from those economic shocks. That's why we've taken action on energy prices with the energy price guarantee. That will also help reduce inflation. That's expected to reduce inflation by up to 5%. What we're also doing is taking action to spur economic growth, to cut people's taxes right across the board, but also to speed up projects. And we've been talking about energy projects. We also want to speed up road projects. We also want to get more broadband and mobile so that we can grow the economy, can attract more investment into places like Lancashire, and we can make sure that there are high-wage jobs available in the future. And of course, some of these decisions are difficult. And some people don't like them. But what I couldn't do is allow the situation to drift. So that is why my government has taken urgent action.
Prime Minister, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. That is Prime Minister Liz Truss live on BBC Radio Lancashire.
We've got the Prime Minister Liz Truss on the line now. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
People like it when politicians are honest. Why don't you just hold your hands up and say, this is a mess, we got it wrong, and we're going to do something different?
We've got to look at the situation this country would be facing if the government hadn't acted. People were facing fuel bills of up to £6,000 this winter, and people and families were worried about that. We were facing very, very high inflation and also a slowing economy. And this is why we took action. This is why we've taken action to make sure that people's bills are no more than £2,500.
But by all accounts, you've made it worse.
And that helps.
The former chair of the Bank of England has said this is a problem of your own making. Top man at the Treasury, David Gork, says this has been caused by the mini-budget that you announced, the financial instability that we're all living through, and our listeners who are worried about losing their homes. You've made it worse.
Well, what I was just saying is the energy package that we've announced is likely to reduce inflation by up to 5%, as well as increasing economic growth. And we're facing an economic slowdown. This is a global issue. There are problems around the world. And this government has taken decisive action. And of course, in that decisive action to lower the tax burden, to get economic growth going, to help people with energy bills, which is the biggest part of the mini budget we announced, is the energy bill support. That is important.
But the choices you've made in this mini budget is going to benefit far greater those who are very, very well off. If you make $1 million, you're going to benefit 55 grand a year from the tax cuts. On 20k, like a teaching assistant or a nurse, £157. A couple of people have said to me here in Nottingham, this is like a reverse Robin Hood.
That simply isn't true.
Which
by
bit of
far
it?
the biggest part of the mini. Well,
that the tax cuts are disproportionately benefiting the wealthiest.
The biggest part of the package that we announced is the support on energy bills, of making sure that people across this country are not facing energy bills of more than £2,500 and that businesses can get through this winter. We were facing a situation where pubs were going to go out of business, where shops were going to go out of business, where people were facing unaffordable energy bills. And the package that we presented in the energy statement, but also in the mini budget last week, the biggest part of that is the help on energy.
People were worried about being able to heat their homes, and you've acknowledged that. People are now worried about being able to keep their homes. And we've dealt with it,
and that is the biggest part of the package.
But with the interest rates and people's mortgages, they're now worried not only can they heat their homes, but whether they can keep their homes, whether they can afford their mortgages.
It's an important principle that interest rates are set by the Independent Bank of England, and that has been the case since 1997. And what we're seeing around the world is we are seeing great pressure on the international markets because of Putin's war in Ukraine. It's pushed up energy prices, it has created inflation, and it's created an economic slowdown. And that is why it's important that we as a government took decisive action to do what we can to grow the economy, but also to help people with their energy bills, which is the biggest part of the economic package.
Tell me how it's a fairer tax system. When people voted for a fairer tax system in the 2019 manifesto, how is what you did a fairer tax system when a 5% tax cut for those who earn more than 150k is benefiting the rich?
Well, the reality is that having lower taxes across the board, which is what we're doing on everything from national insurance to corporation tax to income tax, helps everybody because it helps grow the economy. And for too long, the debate in this country has been about distribution rather than how we grow our economy.
And so you don't mind if it's not fair?
If we don't grow our economy, that means there won't be new investment. It means there won't be new jobs. And it will mean that people don't get the higher pay they deserve. So I'm prepared to take the difficult decisions to get our economy growing. It's not necessarily popular to keep corporation tax low, but it's important we do because I want to attract investment into this country. And the fact is that we cannot tax our way to growth. We had the highest tax rates in this country for 70 years across the board. We've reduced those taxes across the board. And of course, people who are better off tend to pay more taxes. So there's a disproportionate effect there.
Well, let me bring you back to what the IMF said, because the IMF made an unprecedented intervention that we don't normally hear them talk about major economies like this. They said that your tax cuts are likely to increase inequality. And I'd just like to talk directly, Liz, if you could, Prime Minister, I should say, to the people in Mansfield who kind of lent you their vote, to the people who vote for the Conservatives, maybe for the first time in their lives, on the promise that their lives would be better, that this would be levelled up, that they would be benefiting. And here we are with tax cuts that are going to increase inequality. What would you say to those people in Mansfield and Ashfield?
What I would say is I have taken action and the Chancellor has taken action because, first of all, we want to help you get through this winter and next winter without facing those excessive fuel bills. But also, what we want to do is help grow the economy.
But you won't answer, Prime Minister, this question about fairness, this question that all our listeners have been asking me this morning about fairness in these tax proposals that you've made, which have crushed the economy.
It's not fair to have a recession. It's not fair to have a town where you're not getting the investment. It's not fair if we don't get high-paying jobs in the future because we've got the highest tax burden in 70 years. That's what's not fair.
And is there any evidence anywhere in the world that cutting the taxes of the wealthiest people is going to help inequality and help people in Mansfield get richer?
There is plenty of evidence that if you have very high taxes, they lead to lower economic growth.
Well, of course, we've been asking for your questions, and I think to say we've had a huge response is an understatement. Over 4,000 comments on Twitter alone. We are going to try and get through as many of your comments as we possibly can. Just a few I'm seeing coming in this morning. Nick says, I'd like her to give a straight answer as to why she doesn't feel Parliament needs to reconvene in this crisis. I'd like her to do it without flannel about energy prices and the Ukraine, but I very much doubt she won't. Also, as well, we've had Graham in Hartlepool who says, how can it be right that I'm working a 45-hour week with a family and currently paying £220 a month in gas and £160 a month electricity? And also my mortgage has gone up by nearly 200 in the last 3 months, plus petrol, plus food, basic living in my overdraft every month. And it's only going to get worse. I have nothing left. I have any kind of life, really. What is she going to do to help? Well, shall we find out now? We are joined by the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Morning, Prime Minister.
Morning.
Morning. Thank you for your time this morning. I haven't got long, so we're going to dive straight in. You announced £45 billion in tax cuts last year. There's been economic chaos ever since. What are you doing to fix this mess?
Well, I think we need to, first of all, remember the situation we were facing going into this winter, which is people were facing fuel bills of up to £6,000, an economic slowdown and very high inflation. And the decisive action we have taken means that no family will be facing a typical fuel bill of more than £2,500, not just for this year, but also next year. We're also helping businesses, and we've also taken decisive action to reduce the tax burden, to make sure we grow the economy, and our energy package also helps reduce inflation by up to 5 points. And it was right to take that immediate action. Otherwise, people will be facing a very, very difficult economic situation this winter.
The thing is, though, people are very, very concerned. I think we'd be right in saying terrified in some parts where we live. We like to put real questions to people there, and we've taken some of those questions. We just want to play you this question, this little bit of audio from Diane from Gisborough talking about the cost of living. Take a listen to this.
I've had to sell my house. I've lived there for 25 years, and I know the expense now is getting to the point where I can no longer afford to live there.
You mentioned taking these tax cuts. I mean, that's basically going to be in favour of the wealthiest people. People like Diane, who can no longer afford to live in the house that she's been in for decades. What help do you offer her?
Well, first of all, everybody has been offered help with their fuel bills. And that was our priority because people were facing appalling fuel bills. And that was the biggest part of the economic package that we put forward on Friday.
But can I ask, sorry, can I just interrupt there a moment? How are tax cuts for the wealthiest going to help the people who are nowhere near wealthy? How is that going to help, Diane?
Well, we are cutting taxes across the board because we were facing the highest tax burden on Britain for 70 years, and that was causing a lack of economic growth. And without growth, we don't get the investment, we don't get the jobs we need, which helps local communities right around the country. We're also reversing the increase in national insurance. We're also reducing the basic rate. So we're reducing taxes across the board because the tax burden was too high.
What kind of message would you like to give to people who are struggling in this crisis, who are struggling with their mortgages and are going to be so more after everything that's happened with the mini budget and indeed pensions as well? Lots of confusion and scared people over pensions. They're going to be worthless.
Well, what I'm saying is that the government has taken decisive action to help families and businesses with their energy bills this winter. And we've also taken decisive action to get the economy growing and get Britain moving. And that is what ultimately will help all of us pay our bills.
But what kind of decisive action, Prime Minister? Because your decisive action so far has knocked 40% off people's pensions. So what decisive action are we talking about here?
We are facing a global economic crisis following Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. And what I am about is about making sure that British people are protected from that, first of all, by supporting with their energy bills. And the biggest part of our package on Friday was the energy price guarantee. That is the biggest part of what we put in to that mini budget. But also, if we have higher taxes going into difficult economic times, that is likely to lead to a recession. Right. And my concern is I want people to stay in jobs. I want people to be able to earn higher wages. And that was why it was important that we took action on tax. We're also taking action on getting roads built quicker, getting our broadband rolled out quicker, getting our mobile phone signal working, all of those things that will help drive economic growth. But as Prime Minister, I have to be prepared to take tough decisions. And that's what I'm prepared to do.
Well, can I
these
ask you...
decisions will make sure that we see lower inflation than we would have done. Our energy package is predicted to reduce inflation by 5%, and also make sure that we are seeing the economic growth that we need to sustain our country in the future.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to get this question in because it's something that is very close to us and we are running out of time. Child poverty, lots of questions about that sent in to us on Twitter. Your government has been in charge for 12 years. In that time, child poverty has increased in the North East. What are you doing about that?
Well, the number one thing we need to do to help deal with the issues that families face is to help more people get into work and create those high-paid jobs. And that is exactly what our mini-budget is about. It's about getting Britain moving, it's about getting the infrastructure built, and it's about attracting investment around our country, including into the North East.
We've had lots of questions in about the sea life deaths on the North East coast. Are you committed to another investigation and really sorting that problem?
I would need to look into that issue, to be honest.
Right. You haven't already then?
No, I haven't. I know that the Environment Agency are looking at the issues, but I will certainly be raising that with the Environment Secretary.
Right, we've got 10 seconds left. Any message at all you want to leave with our listeners this morning?
The message I want to leave is we are facing tough times. This is a difficult period for the world, but I am determined to make sure that we support people through this winter and we help boost the economy so that we can deliver jobs and growth right across the country.
She's been Prime Minister for less than a month, and this morning Liz Truss is live on BBC Radio Bristol. Prime Minister, good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, it's hard to know what has fallen more since you entered Downing Street, the value of the pound or the Tory poll rating. But on a serious note, no one can deny you entered Downing Street with a difficult job on your hands, but you've made the situation worse so far, haven't you?
Well, let's remember the situation we were facing when I entered Downing Street was that people were facing bills of up to £6,000 this winter for their energy. We were facing very high inflation and an economic slowdown. And I and the Chancellor have taken decisive action to deal with that. From this weekend, the energy bill price guarantee comes in, so people will be facing no more than £2,500 for a typical energy bill. We've also taken action to reduce our tax burden and spur
but Prime Minister, with respect, that is the same scripted answer you've given to every BBC local radio station this morning. You've got the Bank of England stepping in now to try and clean up a mess a government has caused. That has never happened.
We have a very, very difficult economic global situation because of the war that Vladimir Putin has perpetrated in Ukraine. And countries are under pressure around the world.
This isn't Putin. This isn't just about Putin. I mean, your Chancellor on Friday opened up the stable door and spooked the horses so much you can almost see the economy being dragged behind them.
This is about Putin and the war in Ukraine. That is why we are.
So the Bank of England's intervention yesterday was the fault of Vladimir Putin, was it?
What I was saying is it's very difficult and stormy times in the international markets. And of course, the Bank of England is independent. It takes the action it needs to take. And it is responsible for interest rates and it is responsible for financial stability. But it is right that the government took action to deal with people's fuel bills. It's right that we took action to deal with the excessively high tax burden. And it's right that we've taken action to get the economy going. And the vast majority of the package on Friday was about energy support. And if we hadn't acted decisively and quickly on energy support, people would be facing these appalling fuel bills this winter. I think that's what's important to know. Of course, it's a difficult situation. Of course, the decisions are tough, but we have to do it. We absolutely have to do it.
You didn't have to make it worse, did you? You didn't have to create so many tax cuts that it has spooked the market and is causing interest rates almost certainly to jump up. The pound has plummeted. I mean, let's talk about pensions, for example, because one of the reasons the Bank of England, so say, intervened yesterday and announced this package is because they were worried that many pension funds would go insolvent. Can you guarantee to my listeners this morning that their pensions are safe?
Well, the Bank of England does a very, very good job on delivering financial stability.
That's exactly not an answer, Prime Minister. Can you guarantee that people's pensions are safe?
But I want well, the Bank of England do that and they do a very good job of it. But I just wanted to answer the previous point you were making. This is a global financial situation. Currencies are under pressure around the world. This government has stepped in and taken decisive action on energy prices, on getting the economy growing, and also on inflation. Our energy package is expected to reduce inflation by up to 5%.
Well, it's not working so far, is it?
Difficult decisions. Of course, as I've just said, the energy package comes into place this weekend. And what this is about curbing inflation. So it's making inflation less than it otherwise would have been. But this is a global problem. And I think it would be helpful if you did look at the situation in other countries as well.
On energy, yeah, it's bad in other countries, but some would say what's happened and what was announced on Friday made things worse in the UK. Remember, now the cost of borrowing for the UK governments is higher for the UK than it is for Italy and Greece at the moment. Bear that in mind. On energy, Dan on Twitter wants me to ask you about small businesses suffering with high energy costs. When will they know more about what support will be on offer after 6 months?
Well, the business secretary is doing some work on that, and that will be, I think, in about 2 months. He will give people more details of how that package will work. But we're determined to make sure that small businesses are supported. As I've just said, the majority of the package that we announced on Friday at the mini budget is about energy support. So on one hand, you're saying you don't like the package, and on the other hand, you're saying people need more energy support. I mean.
I don't think anyone is objecting, Prime Minister, to the energy support that you announced. I think what people are worried about is the tax cuts that were announced for the wealthy primarily on Friday, which first of all people think are unfair, because if you're going to have that level of public spending required, shouldn't it be spent in other areas? And secondly, it spooked the markets. Borrowing has shot up. I thought you believed in sound money. I thought you believed in low levels of borrowing. That's what you said when you were part of David Cameron's government. Or have you changed your mind on that, like you did about Brexit?
I do believe in sound money. I would point out that interest rates are going up around the world. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates. This is a global phenomenon. But what we need to do, and we had the highest tax burden for 70 years, and we've reduced taxes across the board. And in a lot of cases, it's simply not raising taxes, as we've done on corporation tax. But what we are doing is we are making sure that taxes are lower, so we attract investment into the economy and we get those high-paid jobs into the economy, because as well as facing high inflation, as well as facing high energy prices, we're also facing an economic slowdown. So that is why it's important to have lower taxes across the board, including on national insurance, which affects millions of people, including on income tax, which affects millions of people, so that we get the economy going, so that we get the investment we need to keep people in work and to make sure people get higher wages. That is why we're doing what we're doing.
Prime Minister, thank you. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, live on BBC Radio Bristol.
Your questions have been coming in to us, and the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is on John Akers at breakfast on BBC Radio Stoke this morning. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for coming on with us. We've got loads of questions from listeners to get through, so we're going to get straight to it, if that's OK with you. Have you taken the keys to the country and crashed the economy?
What I have done is I've taken decisive action to deal with a very, very difficult economic situation that we are facing and the world's facing. So if you remember, when I came into Downing Street a few weeks ago, people were facing energy bills of up to £6,000 this winter. We were facing very high inflation, and we were facing an economic slowdown. So what we have done is we've taken decisive action on energy. So from this weekend, we've made sure that families are paying no more than £2,500 typical bill on energy this winter and next winter. We've also taken action on tax to reduce the tax burden, to make sure we're avoiding an economic slowdown and attracting investment into our economy. And the energy package will also help reduce inflation by up to 5 points. Now, of course, these are difficult decisions, but the fact is we're facing a very, very difficult international situation following Putin's war in Ukraine.
I understand that, but now people are worried about their mortgages and worried about when their fixed term ends, whether they'll be able to afford a new deal, and that will dwarf any of the savings that you've made doing anything else. You've done this yourself. This isn't to do with external forces. This is about your mini budget and what it's done to the economy.
Well, interest rates are a matter for the Independent Bank of England. And the fact is that in response to the global economic situation, interest rates have been rising around the world. So they've gone up in the United States, they're going up in other countries, but they are a matter for the Independent Bank of England here in Britain.
The Bank of England have had to bail out your decisions yesterday. The Bank of England have had to step in. The International Monetary Fund have said that they don't think what you've done is a good idea. Is it time to reverse what you've done, bearing in mind what you've seen over the last few days, the damages caused to the pound?
Well, no, it isn't, because the vast majority, or the majority of the package we announced on Friday, was the support on energy for individuals and businesses. And I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I think the idea that people were facing fuel bills of £6,000, that companies would be going out of business, it would have been unconscionable to allow that to happen. And also putting up taxes during a recession or during an economic slowdown would have been a grave mistake. It was the right thing to do. Of course, we face difficult times and the world is facing difficult times. But this government has acted decisively to deal with those issues that people face.
How will easing the tax burden for people earning hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds help people in Stoke-on-Trent who are wondering whether to have a hot meal in a night, or to put the heating on?
Well, first of all, we've taken decisive action to help people with their energy bills, and that is the majority of this package. And we are reducing taxes and not increasing taxes across the board. We had a 70-year high in terms of the amount of tax that the government was taking from people and from businesses. And my concern was that that was stopping economic growth. And ultimately, what economic growth is about more investment in places like Stoke. It is about getting the companies investing, getting those new jobs, getting those wages. And that's what people ultimately care about.
The average salary in Stoke-on-Trent's £25,000. Under your tax cuts, the lowest income households will save £22.12. The richest households will gain almost an extra £10,000 a year. How is that fair? How are you going to win the seats in Stoke-on-Trent?
I want the average salary in Stoke to go up. My policies are all about making sure that average salaries go up and we have a growing and productive economy. And you don't get a growing and productive economy by putting taxes up. That's a reality. Often you get more revenue with lower taxes because it attracts more growth, it attracts more people into work, it attracts more investment. And what my policies are about is about delivering for places like Stoke in the long term, delivering the investment, delivering the higher wage jobs. That's what I want to do. And too often tax policy has just been seen as being about distribution. It's not. It's also about how we grow the size of the pie so that everyone can benefit.
By borrowing more and putting our mortgages up.
We need to borrow more this winter for the energy crisis that we're facing. And I think that was the right thing to do.
We're going to spend more in mortgage fees under what you've done, based on the predictions, than we would have saved with energy.
I don't think anybody is arguing that we shouldn't have acted on energy, which is what the majority of the package that we've done is all about. I think it would have been appalling if people were facing energy bills of up to £6,000, and frankly, I'm quite surprised that is being suggested, that we shouldn't have done that. Now, interest rates, as I've said, are a matter for the Bank of England. The fact is that interest rates are rising around the world, but we made a deliberate decision back in 1997 as a country that politicians shouldn't get involved in setting interest rates.
Sarah Brown from Lightwood's been in touch with us, Prime Minister, and she says, my question to the Prime Minister would be, what are you going to do about reducing food prices? Everything costs more. I'm struggling to keep food on the table and pay the bills. I work full-time and I'm close to contacting a food bank to ask for help, not something I would never have considered 6 months ago. People need real help, so what are you going to do about it, says Sarah.
So our energy package that we've announced will help reduce overall inflation.
You've mentioned the energy package. What else?
By up to 5%. But that will help reduce food prices as well, because farmers, people that produce food, have energy going into their production. So it will help reduce prices overall. We're also going to be announcing soon a package to help food producers and farmers be able to deliver more for people and reduce the red tape on farmers, make sure they're getting the government's full support so they can produce more food at affordable prices.
And Ruth from Lightwood says, a windfall tax on the energy companies. Why won't you do that?
I don't believe that the way we are going to help grow our economy and attract investment is to put arbitrary taxes on companies. That will put off people investing in our country. And the fact is that over the last decade, we've had relatively low economic growth. We've had relatively high taxes, and it has not delivered the results that we want it to deliver across the country, which is why we're taking a different approach. Of course, we need to help people with their energy bills this winter and next winter, and that is the majority of the package that we put forward. But we also need to make sure that we are not putting taxes up to such an extent that they're stopping that economic growth and opportunity.
And finally, Stoke-on-Trent got £56 million to level up, but building costs are going up and they're going to need private money to do the things that they want to do. Where's that private money going to come from?
Well, this is what we've just been talking about. By having an environment that is more attractive for private companies to invest, we will get investment into places like Stoke-on-Trent, which is exactly what I want to deliver as Prime Minister. But what we can't be doing is putting on arbitrary taxes. Then companies don't know where they are. They don't have the confidence to invest in Britain.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for coming on with us this morning.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to the producers and presenters on BBC Local Radio, including Rima Ahmed, Chris Gorham, Anna Cookson, Graham Liver, Sarah Julian, Amy Oakton, James Hansen and John Akers.
Blah, 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 we will deliver. 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 We will deliver. We will deliver. Blah, 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 we will deliver. We will deliver. We will deliver. Blah, blah, blah.